Most of the news around the Occupy Wall Street movement has been focused on New York City. This is quickly becoming a national phenomenon. Hundreds of people continue to occupy Chicago in the second straight week of demonstrations. Thousands took to the streets in Boston and Philadelphia this week. Hundreds more have gathered in Louisville and Wichita and Hartford. Los Angeles City Hall has been home to more than 200 people motivated by the Occupy Wall Street movement. Protesters in Charlotte marched on the local Bank of America over the weekend. And police clashed violently with occupiers in Seattle, Lexington, Denver, Portland, Iowa City, and Miami, Florida. Have also seen their flickers of their own Occupy demonstrations. And 65 people came together in Anchorage, Alaska yesterday, in solidarity with the growing 99% movement. What started in the lower Manhattan is now spreading, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So the question is, how do we get here? How did Americans reach a tipping point to where they're taking to the streets and in some cases demanding a revolution? For more, I'm joined by Andy Kroll, associate editor at TomDispatch and staff reporter for Mother Jones, and from California, Joshua Holland, senior editor and editor at AlterNet. Andy, Joshua, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you both with us. Andy, you described the last decade as the lost decade. Can you tell us what you mean?
Well, for most of the Bush administration and then the final 2 years after that, 2000 to 2010, we saw a flatlining of the middle class. You had the median income for middle-class households level off. In fact, drop by about $2,000, $3,000. You saw wages stagnating. You saw wealth be completely eviscerated by the housing crisis and the financial crisis. And really, for the bottom 99%, as we talk about, it was sort of a wash or a bust for them. There was no gain. There was nothing to be proud about. It really just, eviscerated, most of American families.
And the 1%?
The 1% did pretty well. The top 25 hedge fund managers made $1 billion or more just a year after the financial crisis, and the stock market has rebounded to a degree. And you've seen the financial sector, in its consolidated form, do pretty darn well, far better than the remaining 99%.
Joshua, one of the things that I thought was most brilliant about the piece that you wrote in AlterNet, and every American should know, is how different the income of the average American working family would be right now if the top 1% had not snatched all that cash from the Reagan Revolution forward that they weren't snatching from the 30s all the way up to the 80s. In other words, if things had just kind of stayed the same. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, Tom, I'm a nerdy guy, so I went back and I tried to figure out just the statistics about what kind of share the income of our national income was being taken by the people in the top 1% versus the other 99%, which is, of course, the slogan of this movement. And it's so fascinating to see that from the end of World War II all the way through 1980, you can choose any year within that, the top 1% took in 10% of the national income. And during the Reagan administration, there was a shift so that by the time that he left office in 1988, the top 1% were then taking in 15.5% of the national income, and the other 99% were sharing the remaining 84.5%. But then it even accelerated beyond that. So if you look at the 10 years from 1999 through 2008, which is the end of this data set, the top 1% during that period took in 20.04% of our national income, twice as much. And the point that I make in the piece is that they didn't become twice as smart or twice as hardworking or twice as good looking. It was a result of a series of very specific policies that led to a redistribution of the national wealth upwards. So, we could talk about trade policy, various policies of the Federal Reserve, the dollar policy, union labor law is a very big part of this story. But the real conclusion that I get is that, we hear a lot about how this movement may not have as focused a message as one might want. But I actually think that we are the 99% is a message that implies quite a sophisticated understanding of the economic problems we're facing.
Yeah, absolutely, and very, very well said. Andy, isn't this all an indictment not just of Bushonomics or Clintonomics, but the whole premise of the Reagan Revolution that has been just going full steam boogie right up until today.
Right, the chasm between the very, very wealthy, the top 1%, or even the top 0.1%, and the rest of the population has not just been in the works for the past decade. It's been in the works for many decades, really, like you said, since the Reagan Revolution and the policies enacted by his administration, and it's been growing ever since. And I think the Occupy Wall Street movement, just like the protests in Wisconsin, the through line between these two is this sense of, growing economic inequality, of economic injustice, and that nothing is happening. It's getting worse rather than getting better. And to me, that's really the thread that combines these two protests.
Joshua, the IMF just came out with a report saying that wealth inequality not only has elements of unfairness, all the obvious things like that about it, but that it also, that wealth inequality also produces or reduces the ability of an economy to grow. Does that comport with what you understand?
It really does. I mean, we hear a lot of spin from conservatives about how the wealthy are job creators and wealth producers. The opposite is true when you look at the upward redistribution of wealth from a broad middle class to a very narrow few at the top. We have an economy that is a consumer-based economy, for better or worse. About 70% of our economic activity is based on consumer spending. And when you see such a lopsided share go to those at the top, we know from various studies that if you give a tax cut, for example, to a very wealthy household, what they do is they don't spend it. They put it in a bank. And when you see that the fundamental core problem in our economy right now is a lack of demand, it's demand that creates jobs, you can really see this relationship between increasing inequality and a much more vulnerable economy in terms of even being vulnerable to shocks. There was a report out last week that found that a third of Americans would not be able to make their next rent or mortgage payment if they lost their job. And one of the things that I found so interesting about that is that it's not just the very poor. People making $100,000, 10% of them reported that they did not have enough money put away to survive 1 month. Our post-World War II savings rate, that is the amount of money we were able to put away from our paychecks for a rainy day, for a disaster, was about 8%, and that declined dramatically at the same time as our wages started to stagnate. So, Americans, it's left Americans tapped out, without reserves, and without a lot of money to spend on goods and services that drive economic growth and create jobs.
An amazing story. Andy, Joshua, thank you both for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Do appreciate it.